Ready to boost your video creations? Try Maxon Studio. Maxon Studio's got your back with a sleek dashboard that's like your own personal editing playground. We're talking dynamic capsules galore. Our capsules are designed to supercharge your content creation game inside After Effects. So say goodbye to staring at a blank screen wondering where to start. Maxon Studio hooks you up with pre-designed, customizable elements. The collection is always growing, from elegant motion graphics to seamless transitions, animated titles, and amazing effects. The best part is, you don't need to be a design wizard or spend hours tweaking every little detail, because user-friendly controls make it easy to tweak text, colors, and more to match your vibe. So, what are you waiting for? Start creating breathtaking videos today with Maxon Studio. Take it for a spin with our free 14-day trial. Level up your content now.
Hey everyone, happy Thursday. Welcome to this kind of special live stream. Normally I live stream at the end of the month, but I'm actually doing 2 this month. So yeah, I thought I would steal this free Thursday and do some of my kind of top tips in Redshift. So first of all, hey to everyone who's joined. So hey to Dancers for Peas, Sivan, Ron, Abdullah, Lisa. Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're all from. Thanks for joining. So yeah, think of this as like a maybe 40-minute quick tips live stream. So hopefully you'll come away with having learned something new. If you have any of your own tips, feel free to add them in the kind of like comments or the chat section of YouTube. So yeah, and ask any questions that you want. So yeah, we're streaming live onto the Maxon training team and the Maxon YouTube channels. So feel free to open up that little chat section, say hi, let me know where you're from, let me know any kind of like good tips that you know in Redshift, and we can share them amongst the community. That would be cool. Also, hey to everyone else saying hey. So to Annie Mazed, Juan, Ben, Phil, Robert, Tracy, Max, Vince, Uber. Nice to see you guys. And you're welcome, Lisa, for doing this extra one. I like streaming as much as I possibly can. So yeah, the more the merrier, in my opinion. Okay, cool. So I'm going to get right into it because, yeah, my plan is this will be maybe kind of like a 45-minute live stream, hopefully just full of a bunch of great stuff. So we're going to be covering tips inside of Redshift, and some of these tips will be available in any DCC. So whether you're using C4D, Maya, Blender, Houdini, hopefully you'll learn something new in here. We're going to start off by looking at some lighting tips, and this is going to be a sort of like 5 tips in one. And it's just a few little things that we can do to, spice up our lighting. And a lot of them are just really easy to do. So yeah, I'm inside of C4D and I've got this sort of scene set up. Some of you might recognize it from the UV workflows streams we did ages ago. Yeah, it looks pretty cool. So I thought I'd add some like fun lighting to this. So the first tip, so we're getting straight into it. The first tip is going to be using light shaders to create light gradients or to fade lights out. So the way that we can do this is if we just grab ourselves an area light. So it's going to come in, grab an area light, and then let's just come into our 4 views and let's just reposition this area light. So we can see this is obviously like, this is huge, right? Huge light. So I'm just going to pull this down and then let's just make it a lot smaller. So I've actually got this one here. So it's about 30 by 6. So let's set that to 30 by 6. And so we have this light now, this area light in my scene. and we can see it's here. So at the moment in my render view, we can see it's casting loads of light. It's way too intense. So all we need to do is come into our intensity and we can just pull this down. And what we're also going to do is we're going to create this this fade out effect. And then I'll show you how you can create a gradient effect. And there's an important step we need to take in order to do this. And that is actually to reduce the spread of my light. And this is going to allow me to actually see that light strip and then create that gradient or that fade out. So my spread, what it's doing is a value of 1 is the light is being cast at 180 degrees out. So it's being spread all out into my scene. As I reduce that spread value, it's going to target it and direct it more and make it a bit more of a spotlight. So if I pull this all the way down, you can see what I mean. So I've now pulled that light all the way in and we're getting less of that spread. And it also makes it more intense. So it's important to note that if you are reducing the spread, it therefore makes the light way more intense as well. So I can just reduce that down a little bit more, or we can even play with the exposure. So this is like a multiplier or a divider. So I can pull this right down and you can see how we really change the intensity of that light. So this is the first step. We have our light, got it pointing down. We've adjusted the size of that and we've adjusted the spread. So now this is where we can do the fun stuff. So we can add ourselves a light shader. So inside of my area light, we have this add graph option. And this is how we can add a light shader or a light material onto my area light. So what I can do, I can just add the graph and we can see that it's actually added a material tag and it's added this material here. So I've not got my my material previews up just to make things faster for the live stream. And so we can double click this and we now have like our material node editor, but we have a area light material. And so what we can do is we can double click and we know the way that we can create a ramp or a gradient is the ramp node. So we can grab that ramp node and we can drag and drop that in. And then what we can do is we can actually connect it to the color. And so at the moment, I'm going to leave my ramp, this black and white sort of gradient, and I'm just going to connect the output to the color. And so what I can do, I can highlight this over this and I can go general, I can go color, or a little tip for you. So we've got tips in tips now, is if you command click one of these little dots, so not your keyframe one, but this one here, it actually adds that input to your node for you. And we can plug that in there. So if we take a little look inside my render view, we can now see we've actually created that fade out. And the reason is because my ramp is set to vertical, so we have a vertical projection going on, or a vertical gradient. The color of the light is white to black. So if we think about it, if the light color is black, we're getting no light. So we're able to create this fade. And if I just tweak this black handle, you can see how we're creating this fade effect. So I can kind of pull that up and I can really play around with that fade. Or what we can do is we could do a horizontal fade. And so we can have it fade out this way. And then what I will do actually, let me make this really apparent. Let me make it really kind of like low on that spread value. So now we have that really harsh line, right? So we have a harsh line fading out. But what if we duplicated the black, put the white in the middle, and then put the black either side? We now have it kind of, we have that softened edge either side now. And so this is how we can create the light shader or the light material. And we have it in the new node editor now. So previously it was actually the Espresso node editor, but you'll see it's now in our kind of like lovely C4D one. We're able to create the fade, but what we can also do is we can use this to then create a gradient or a color gradient as well. So let me just come in and I can change this to maybe be sort of a orangey color. And then maybe we could even have it fade into a yellow, or maybe a little bit more of a orangey color here. And then we can sort of grab a second one and we're able to create this different sort of light pattern just by playing with some of our colors inside of here. So we can create these different kind of effects, and we can change the projection of that as well. And then we can create different gradient effects that way. And so if I just kind of bring on the one that I made sort of on the actual shot that you saw on the hero image of this, is it's literally just the same thing. So we have that gradient light, and then it's just a ramp, and these are the colors that I went with for that one. Okay, so that's your first one. So that was our first tip. That is just by looking at gradients and the way that we can create light shaders. So loads of different possibilities that you can probably come up with and make it look far better than I can on here. The next one is working with gobos. So it's something that I've talked about before, but for anyone who doesn't know, we're able to apply what's called a cookie or a texture pattern over our light to create some interesting sort of light rays and patterns that otherwise could be quite challenging to do with geometry or mesh. So let me switch this off. And again, we're just going to take an area light. And let me just steal the same one. Do you steal the same one? Yeah, we can steal the same one here. And so let me just make this a 5x5 square. Actually, no, let's make it a little bit bigger. Right, so we've got our area light again, and we've just stolen that same one. And we've got our spread down to 0. Again, this is really, really important when we're working with gobos. We need to make sure our spread is either at 0 or a really, really low value. And I'll show you why in a minute. So what we need a gobo texture. So I've actually got one of the Grayscale Gorilla ones. Yeah, shout out GSG. And it looks something like this. And so this is kind of what a gobo texture would look like. But you can kind of really use any gradient texture. Effectively, what's going to happen is everywhere that we see as black is going to block the light. Everywhere that is 100% white will allow the light through. And everything that is kind of a gray or a gradient in between will allow some of the light to shine through. That's kind of the concept here. So we can take this sort of really standard, not very exciting looking area light. We can apply our gobo, and the where we do that is inside of my area light, come down to our object tab, and then you've got this texture input here. And so it's going to be plugged into this opacity texture input. So again, simple drag and drop. So I'm going to drag and drop my gobo into here. And now hopefully you can see what I might do is I'm going to make this a lot more intense, but purely so you can see it better on the stream. So if I increase that intensity, we now have this far more interesting light pattern that isn't just this basic square. And we can do kind of window effects, we can do plant effects, we can do animated gobos. So what we can do is, if I drop this down, so in my little opacity texture, drop that down, we have animation. So you can actually apply a animated gobo, so PNG sequence, and then you can set the mode to simple, it's just going to play through the animation. Loop is going to loop through that animation. So when it gets to the end, it will go back to the beginning and play through. Ping pong will play it forwards, play it backwards, play forwards, play backwards. So we can have animated gobos in here. And the opacity, what the opacity can do, it's going to change the opacity of this actual texture map. And so if I start to reduce this down, you can see how this actually changes the gobo texture as well. And then I could come in and I could say, you know what, maybe make this area light a bit bigger. And we could even, I don't know, rotate it slightly so we get some more interesting looking results inside of there. And you can even color these. So we could apply like a color to my texture. And now we have this slightly more interesting light effect on here. And so this is the one that I went with. So it's the same. If I just switch off my bokeh, we can see we have that in the background there, just really, really faint. And if we add it with that gradient, it just starts to look a little bit more interesting. Cool. So what I will do before I go to the next tip, I'm going to quickly look at a few questions. because I don't want to miss any. So I'm just going through. So there's a question from Peter saying about the visibility toggle from the Redshift area light. So have they removed that? I didn't know that. That was interesting. Is this not? So I think if we're talking about the visibility of the actual light, you should be able to. If I'm getting the question right, that is, and apologies if I'm not. Let me know if I'm not. We should be able to still have the light visible. So what this means is if we enable this, the light, the wireframe of the light will actually be visible in my render as well. So yeah, Peter, let me know if that's the answer to your question. Cool, just flicking through here. So from Lisa, quick question. What's the difference between intensity and exposure? They seem to do the same thing. I agree. They do on the surface look like they're doing the same thing. So basically, the intensity is your overall intensity or brightness of the light. And exposure, think of that as your light intensity multiplier. So if I have an exposure value of 1, I'm multiplying the intensity by itself again. And then it works the reverse. So if I do it divisible by 1, it's effectively dividing the light intensity by itself. And so it's a really good way of, if we're going really, really low with our intensity values, instead we could go lower with my exposure values, and you'll find that you have a slightly easier way of adding or removing light in your scene. So hopefully that helps. So a few people are saying that they've checked the Redshift update and they've removed the visible option in the area light and dome light. Yes, so this is something to mention. There was actually a release yesterday, but I am on the previous version. So I'll check that for you. I'll update tomorrow, and I'll see. Also, hi to Patrick 4D in the chat. Hey Pat. So yeah, sorry about that visibility thing. I'll find out for you, but I'm on the slightly older version of Redshift because I make it a point not to update just before I do a live stream. Cool, right, so moving on, a couple of extra little tips here in lighting. So we've just covered light shaders and gradients or fade outs, and we've looked at creating gobos. There's another little tip here, and this is something I learned from my streaming pal, Dustin Valkema, and that is bounce cards and negative fills. This was something I didn't even know what those words meant before I did the stream with him. And it's a really cool way of adding or removing light in your scene. And what's great is it actually doesn't necessarily impact render time because it's not an additional light. So what I mean by that is, sometimes in photography or light studios, you could have a big white piece of card, and if a light was pointing towards it, because white or bright materials then add more light bounce, the light's going to hit it, and it's then going to bounce, and it creates more light in your scene. And it's the opposite effect. That's a bounce card. The opposite effect for a negative fill, if you have a big black sheet or a big black wall, as the light hits it, the light gets absorbed, and so it takes away some of the light in our scene. And it can be a nice trick to add or remove light without adding an extra area light. And so let's take a look at how we could do this. So if I add a plane into my scene, and what I'm going to do is, let me just go through main. We have this plane, and let me just set it to positive X, and let me just slightly get it out of shot. So I have this big sort of plane here. Let's maybe we could make it a little bit smaller. And if I create a new material, and let's just create a white diffuse material, hopefully you can see, hopefully it's visible, as I switch on and off this plane, we're getting additional light in my scene, but we haven't had to add any other lights. And so this would be effectively a bounce card. But what we could do, we may not want to go as intense as this white color. So all we're changing here is the color of the material on the bounce card. So as we reduce this down, you can see how it has an effect. And so then what we can do is if I do the opposite and I make it 100% black material in color, we're actually then taking away and absorbing some of that light just by applying this plane inside of here. So negative fill bounce cards can actually work. And what I think is great about them is we're not having to add another light. We're not having to work out the intensity of another light. We're not having to worry about, is it reflecting in the wrong place? Is it creating shadows? We can do this and it's not going to affect any of those things or any of that performance. And as Maxon says, it's also a good way to add color to the scene. Very true. Cool. So, right. So we've taken a little look at light shaders, gobos, bounce card, negative fill. One thing I absolutely love is like my favorite thing. And if you watch any of my streams, you'll see that I do this on a regular basis. It is a little trick inside of area lights. So let me switch this plane off, switch this area light off. What we're going to do, we're going to create a brand new area light. And I'm just going to make it small. So we have this little area light here. If I click my area light, this little button, that if you didn't know it was there, you'd absolutely miss it. This little button is probably one of my favorite things inside of Cinema 4D and Redshift. So if I click this button, we have the ability to add a target tag to my light or a target tag and a null object. So what I tend to do, I tend to add a target tag and a null object. And what it does is it adds a target tag to my area light, so we can see this. And that is just by, going to right click, animation, target tag. And then within my target tag, it's automatically then added that null. And this is now my light target. So now what's going to happen is I can move my little null and I can say, you know what? I want this to be exactly here where I've got my little, Maxon key that we all kind of need, don't we? And then what I can do is I can move my area light around and it's always going to be pointing at that target. So honestly, my most used feature probably in the software. Or what you can do, so the other option was just to add the target tag. And so then what you could do is instead of using the null, you could just drag and drop your object inside of there, and it will always then point to the axis center of your object. Brill. So we're absolutely flying through these. That's great. That's good. That's a good thing. So another one, this is something I talked about a little bit on my Instagram the other day, is clay mode. So what you'll find sometimes when you're lighting is sometimes there's a conversation of, do I do my lighting first or do I do my textures first? The same kind of concept to the bounce card and the negative fill. Bright and, light materials that have emission and things like that, or reflection, can impact how our light looks, as can darker materials. It can, make it bounce, it can absorb light, etc. And so what I like to do is something called clay mode. So in your render view, I just need to pop open some of my extra little buttons here. There's this option. If I drop this down, we're in regular mode, so I can see my regular render, but we also have this clay mode. And so what it's going to do is going to apply a clay material over the surface of all of my objects, and it's going to allow me to really see how my light is lighting my scene without the impact of my textures on materials. This is also an extremely useful tip when you're working with displacement. If you can't necessarily see your displacement because of your lights and your materials, switch on clay mode, and I promise you it just makes life so much easier. And we had a quick question on this. So yeah, feel free to keep questions coming and I will keep an eye on them as we go through. Maxon was wondering, do you know if we can render clay mode through the picture viewer? So what you can do is you can actually use the material override option. So inside your render settings, you can right click and there is material override. And what you can do is you can do clay, and it will render the clay mode for you. Or what you can do is do a custom material, and you can throw in any of your materials. I mean, ideally not that area like material, but you can throw in your material and you can render it that way. So you can create your own clay, create your own wireframe, create your own AO, and you can easily render this way. So yeah, right click, material override. And we also had a quick question. So on this, is it possible to exclude glass materials with clay mode? Yes. Exclude, drag and drop your material. The ones that you want to exclude, just drag and drop those in there. So you can include and exclude certain things. Okay, right. So those were the sort of 5 lighting tips. So we just looked at light shaders and gradients. We looked at target, tag and null, gobos, spread, clay mode, and the bounce card negative fill. So the next few are going to be some texturing tips, but there's one really quick one I do want to show. And you know what? Let's just go to a whole new scene for this. And cool, let's kick this off. So I've been asked a few times on Instagram or emails, how do we create a gradient background? Is there a way to do it in the dome light? Is there a way to do it that's kind of like a simpler method? And there is kind of a way to do it in the dome light, but it's not very good, and you get that kind of that banding effect. And I spoke to some of the developers. I spoke to Adrian, who's this incredible guy with Redshift, who's very technical, far more knowledgeable than I am. And the method that he said to do it is by using mesh and the Redshift object tag. So I'm going to show you, and this absolutely is the way that I would create a gradient background with more control inside of Redshift. So just for convenience, I'm just going to throw an object just so we can see it. And I'm going to throw in a camera, and I'm going to look through my camera. So what we can do is we can create a plane, and I'm going to make the plane a child of my Redshift camera, and I'm just going to zero it out. So what I've done, I've zeroed, so I've command 0, which has reset all my coordinates to 0, and it's now put it in the sort of coordinates of my object. If I set it to +x in my orientation, and then, is it +x? Have I done the wrong one? I have. Let's do +y. There we go. +z, or z, if you're from the US. So what we can do is it's still a child of my Redshift camera, and I can just scale this up, pull it as far back as we need to. And now we effectively have this background on here. And then to get a nice gradient, we can create an incandescent material. And incandescent is just a nice sort of illuminated material. So if we use the standard material here, we won't get the correct kind of colors that we're after. So we can throw that on my plane. And then very similar to that area light, actually, we can just grab a ramp. So this is how we create a gradient. It's called a gradient in Octane. It's called a ramp in Redshift. We can connect this to my illumination color. And let's just load in like any old preset here. So we have our background. And now what happens is as I move my camera, my gradient background will stay as it is. And that's because it is linked as a child of my Redshift camera. And so then we can come in and we can change this gradient if we want to. We can tweak it. We can play with the handles. But we don't have to worry about having to create a gradient and add it to our dome light. The final step of this is adding the Redshift object tag to the plane. And then we just want to make sure that we switch off all of these controls. And this means it's not going to cast any shadows. It's not going to receive any shadows. It's not going to, mess with any of our reflections or refractions. It is purely just now going to be that background gradient. So this is the best way to do that for now. Okay. So let's open up another scene file here. What have I got going on? Random material. Here we go. And let's just set my output to be something like this. Okay, so let's kick this off. Okay, so let me just switch off that. I want to show you something that I actually posted on my Instagram yesterday, and it's a way of creating variation to noise really, really easily with the jitter node, but I'm going to do it in a little bit more detail. So I'm just going to create a brand new material. I'm going to build this all from scratch for you. I'm going to drop it on my little Lego piece here. And cool, right. So this is what we have. So as we know, when we use like a cloner setup and we apply a Maxon noise to it, if I just solo this noise, so again, kind of like tips in tips here for you, you can actually solo, if you're using the C4D node editor and not the Espresso node editor, you can solo to see how noise projects on your objects in your render view. And so what I'm going to do is, just to make this extremely visible for everybody, I am going to increase contrast. Right. So what's happening here is it's not insanely visible. You know what? I want to make it really visible for you all. So let me just steal a little Lego piece. And then let's put it here. And then let's just command click. Right, so I'm just going to recreate something for you just to show you this. Okay, cool, right. So we can see we have the exact same noise on our patterns here. So what we can do is, why can't I move this? Well, let's try it again. Okay. For some reason, I can't move the Maxon noise. I'm attempting to, but it's not working. Okay, let's see if I can just do this without having to move nodes. There we go. So we've got the jitter node. Oh, there we go. It's come back to me. Thank you. Thank you, Redshift. So we have our Maxon noise here that we can now see. We have the exact same pattern on each noise. What we can do is, if we change the offset of each of these, we're going to get a different pattern across the different ones. But what we can do is we can use the jitter node to automatically adjust and change the offset. And the way that we can do that is because the offset is a float value, so X, Y, and Z, we can use the output float and we can input to the offset. And then all we need to do in my jitter is we need to, so it needs to be on it does need to be on the cloner setup, doesn't it? Let's do my cloner setup then. Cloner. So I need to show this on a cloner setup for it to actually make sense for you. 1. And then let's do, I should have probably had this preset up, really. Probably would have been useful, wouldn't it? Let's come out of here. So let me set this up really quickly. It won't take too long. So we have my cloner. Let's see my cloner. Do my count, and then let's do the X axis. And let's do this a bit more. Here we go. This is gonna look better. Right. So, right, let's do that again, just so I can actually show that a little bit clearer. So, cloner setup, we have the exact same clones on here. We have the exact same pattern on our clones. This was a recurring issue that we all come across when we're working with cloner setups. So in order to get a different pattern on these, what we need to do is we then need to do that jitter setup. So it won't work if they're separate objects, but that's fine because we can just set up our own noise on the different objects if we want to. But in this case, if we want to be using MoGraph, we can actually output that float into the input offset. And then as I come in and I increase these values, you'll see how that pattern starts to change. And so if I enter a value of 10, we can now see that each of our clones is now getting a different noise pattern. So this is how we're able to use that cloner setup with noises or with textures. We can use it with texture maps as well. And we can use the jitter to change this. So the float max value, the important part about this is to make sure this number is higher than the number of clones that you have. So if you have 100 clones, make sure this value is at least 100, so you get 100 different patterns. Cool, yeah, so sorry, I need a little bit of setup there. I probably should have pre-made that, only because I didn't think it was like super visible on this, but the concept is the same. So we can now see that we have those different patterns set up on here. We're all going to get a different bit of variation. All right, so moving on from the jitter node is we have two new-ish shaders, and not new from the most recent release yesterday, but new from, I think it was like a month ago or 2 months ago. And those are the random color and random material switch nodes. And these are just really simple ways of adding, again, variation. So the way that we can set this up is I've just got this plain material on here. And as we know, if I come in and change the color, it's going to change the color overall of every single one of my clones. So if I just come in and search random color switch, what we can do is we can actually apply multiple different colors, and then we can distribute those over my geometry. So if I just connect that to the base color, and then all we have to do is define our colors. And so the important thing here is we're talking about color, we're not talking about materials. So if I maybe add some different materials into here, so just quickly pick some simple ones here. And then what we can do, we can add more colors. So we can add more inputs, and we can choose new colors inside of here. We can remove them. We can play with the seed value. So I can change this distribution. But this was all possible before with color user data. But the important thing that we can now do is we can now actually have a little bit more control about how much of each color we're able to distribute across our clones. So if we then say, okay, I want most of them to be pink and only a few of them to be blue and yellow, all we have to do is we come into the weight values and we just reduce these down. And now we can see, okay, now only a few of them are blue and yellow, and majority of them are going to be pink. And then we can continue to play around with that seed value if you want to. Another cool thing that we can do is if I just remove these inputs, is we actually have a color jitter inside of here. And this allows me to randomly vary the hue, saturation, and values of my colors. So I've just left one color on just to demonstrate this. So if I enable that, and then I start to play around with my hue variation, I can adjust the hue, and we've only got one color at the moment. So I'm playing with my hue, I'm able to play with my saturation, and I can also play with the values. And again, we have these seed values, these random seed values, so I can change the distribution of this if I want to. And then again, we could continue to add colors and do that as much as we want. So the next one is the random material switch, which is again a new shader that came out with the random color switch. And this is slightly different. So we have this kind of pink plastic material here. So let's just name this just for organization purposes. So we have plastic, and let's make it a bit bigger. And then let's create a new material, which is the standard material. And we're going to make this like a chrome, like a metal material. So if I just solo it, we can just add some metalness. It's an easy way of creating metal for you. Add your metalness, define the color that you want your chrome to be, and maybe we can do a little bit of a brushed chrome. So we now have this plastic material, and we have this kind of shiny, metally chrome material. So now what we can do is we can take the random material switch, and we just need to connect our materials into our shaders. So the random color, what we were doing there is we were defining the colors, but then we still had to make sure we plugged it into a standard material. But what this is doing is this actually goes in between your material and your output, and we're able to just connect our shaders in and connect that out here. And it works in the exact same way. So we're now able to distribute between my pink plastic and my chrome. And we could then say, oh, you know what, actually, we want to have more of the plastic. So I can reduce that weight value and just incorporate a few of those chrome. And then again, we have that tint jitter as well. So hue, saturation, and value that we can play around with. And you can add more shaders to this if you want to. So we could add another input and plug in a third material, maybe like, I don't know, a glass or something like that. The fun thing with this is, again, just for like simple purposes, let me just create a cube. So we've got 3 different cubes here, all with slightly different names. And I'm just going to apply this on here. And let's just, I don't know, let's just do a dome light just so we can see these a little bit. So you're probably thinking, oh, Elly, but we could have done that before with a MoGraph setup. We can use user data. Yes, you can. It's not as easy to control when you don't have the distribution options. But where this now is quite fun is where we then have it on separate objects. And then if we do random color switch, and then let's just, again, just put in a couple of these different values. And then I connect these into here. What we're able to do is it should, why is it not giving me? There we go. I just had to change the seed value. So what it will now do is it'll actually randomly distribute these colors based on the name of our objects. So we no longer have to have it as a MoGraph setup. We can have this all as separate objects with separate names. And then we can actually come in and we can play around. So white pro wasn't the best color. Let's do yellow. And so this is one single material that is actually on all of the objects, but we're randomly distributing the color, and it would work the same way with materials as well. All right, cool. So while I'm on this setup, actually, let's, just for the sake of me not liking this dome light, I'm just going to throw in a HDR image. Okay, cool. So let's switch that off. Right, so I want to show you something quick. And this was a tip that James, so on our team, James Marga, so shout out James, showed me, and it's to do with the reference node. So what we're going to do is I'm going to create a brand reference material. I'm going to set up a cube 1, cube 2, and I'm going to set up a cube 3. The purposes of this is just so I can show you how this works. And what we're going to do is we're going to set these onto our cubes, And our brand reference, we're going to choose our sort of like our brand color, right? So let's say we have our lovely brand color, and let's do red for Redshift. And we can connect this into our output. So we can do absolute color into our output here. And so now our brand reference is now our brand color. So what we can do, we can then take the reference node. So reference allows us to then reference another material, and we can then use that in this kind of like existing material for the first cube. I can pull in the brand reference and I can connect that in. And so let's have this one as a slightly metal version. And then we can do the same thing here. I can take a reference node and I can connect the brand reference, plug that in there, and I'm going to leave this one default. And let's maybe make the dome light a bit more. And then the third one, I just want to add the same thing again. And so there's a purpose to this, I promise you. And we bring our brand in there, and then maybe we can make this one slightly transmissive. So we have they're all the same color because they're referencing that brand color, but then one's metal, one's plastic, and one's glass. And now what we can do with this setup, because everything is connected to our reference node, we could actually come into our brand reference. And if they say, oh, actually, you know what, we've changed our brand color, or we now want it to be, you know, the blue instead of the red, we can come in and we can change it to blue, and we can refresh it. And then because every material is linked to that reference, it's going to update those colors automatically. So we don't have to keep going back into every single color or every single material and update that. We're able to just do it really quickly this way. Okay, so the final sort of like few things I want to talk about is, let's talk a bit about displacement blending first, because why not? But let's do it on a bit more of an interesting scene file. So let's use this. We'll use this scene, why not? And let's use this object. So what we'll do is we'll just use the plastic and we'll bring this in here. So a lot of the time, what we do is we can do like a Maxon noise, for example, and we can set up some displacement. So what we do is you plug our noise into our displacement and our displacement into our displacement output. And then what we want to do is, let me just switch that off. And hopefully this should kick in. Oh no, we have the wheel. There we go. Oh, beautiful. Let me just reduce this scale down. This might still be a little bit too high. Okay, so let's tweak our noise a little bit. So let's make a bunch of tiny noise. So this is what we have. So a bunch of different noise here for you. And then in our displacement, let's make this a lot smaller. Okay, so what we have here is a single amount of displacement. But what if we wanted to add some secondary displacement? What if we want to say, oh, you know what, we want to actually have some slightly finer amounts of sort of noise here. We can maybe find one of the ones that has a little bit of a more interesting noise pattern, maybe make that smaller. But the trouble is, if we then add displacement and maybe we want to make this again a little bit smaller, and we connect that in, the only thing we can do at the moment is plug that into the displacement, but it's going to overtake our initial displacement. So how do we then combine these two together? Well, what we can do is there is actually a node that you may not have seen, and that is the displacement blender. And what this is going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to actually combine up to 4 layers of displacement all into the same material. So all I do is plug my displacements into my input values, and I make sure I replace that into my displacement. And then what I have is I have these different weight values. So kind of similar to we're looking at the color, the random color weight values. We can choose how much we're going to distribute these displacements. Or what we can do is we can add a value and we can do an additive mode, which is going to add our two displacements together. And then what we can do is we're going to see them both on my object. And what's great about this is not only are we able to blend multiple displacements together, but we're also able to have full control of each individual displacement scale in here. So what we could do is we could, layer these two noises together, but we don't get that granular control of our different displacements. So that's something you might want to do. Also as well, we have a bump blender. So we have a bump blender here. So we can do the same kind of thing. The main purpose of the bump blender is if you're blending things like bump and normal maps together, you can use the bump blender. If you're just blending bump maps together, use the color layer. So use the color layer and just, combine them this way and use your add or multiply blending mode. But yeah, bump blender, round corners, normal maps, bump maps could all be blended together in the exact same way. Okay, so, God, it's already been 50 minutes already. It flies. So let me have a quick look to see if there are any questions as I was going through. And I can't promise I can answer them all, but from Lisa, when you're about to test rendering, which light is best for this? So if I'm doing a full test render, I've normally got my full lighting set up, and my general lighting consists of a dome light and HDR, and then area lights to kind of support some of those areas. So yeah, I would only ever do a test render once I've got my lighting pretty much done, because we're doing a test, we're not going to be able to see a accurate result. So yeah, I normally set up, I'd say maybe 95% of my lighting before I do any kind of test rendering. Cool. So there's a few questions about the lighting tool. I don't actually use it. I don't know if it's available in Redshift. I know people bring it up a lot, but I don't specifically use it. So I'm sorry, I can't help with that one. Dean was asking, is there a background object that will work in Redshift that will create the same result as the plain object in the ramp material? No, so the background doesn't work. I don't believe the background object works inside of Redshift. The best option really is the one that we just looked at, which is creating the mesh and applying the gradient to that. Yeah, like I said, there's a way to do it in the dome light in the environment, but it's 8-bit. So you get banding, and so it doesn't actually look nice. And so that was a method to actually make it look nice. Also, second question was, can the background object in Redshift cameras create the same result as the plane? No. So it's a good question though, very good question. And it is something I did test out because I do get asked this question quite frequently. And so what Dean is referring to is inside of the camera, as we look through the camera, inside the background, we actually have a background option here. So we can override and we could apply the horrible color that was. We could apply a red to our background, or we can apply an image. And so the trouble is we can't actually apply a gradient to this. Unfortunately, we're not able to do that. So you can see we can't actually create a gradient. If you want to create your own gradient in Photoshop and bring that in as an image, then yes, you can do that, but you're limited to your control. So yeah, unfortunately, that's not necessarily correct, or it's not necessarily possible. So yeah, unfortunately, plain with incandescent for now, and then in the Redshift object tag, make sure you disable all of the visibility, reflections, refractions, so it doesn't have an impact on your actual scene itself. So Tiago was wondering, why do textures look different in the viewport as opposed to the render view? Is there a way to sync them both? This is a very good question. So originally, Redshift was a third-party render engine, which was, developed and used inside of C4D. Now it's part of Maxon. It's far more integrated, and you'll see kind of like every month new releases, new updates, and new improvements. And so the viewport, compared to what it looked like 2 or 3 years ago, looks far more accurate than it did before. But there are still some things that need to be developed and are being worked on. And so, yes, you will not get a like for like in the viewport and your render view. You'll also find your render view versus your final render will also look slightly different. And that's because we want the render view to be fast, but to still give you a good preview. And so there are steps being taken to make the viewport more accurate. Those of you who have used Redshift for years, like I have, will already be seeing those changes. But yeah, unfortunately, it isn't a like for like, but maybe one day it will be. When will the stream be available for download? Yes, absolutely. So all of our streams are recorded. We're actually streaming on the Maxon Training Team and the Maxon YouTube channels. Everything gets uploaded onto the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel. It's also timestamped, thanks to the amazing Dr. Sassy. So shout out Dr. Sassy. So you will be able to go back through. As soon as this is done, it'll be uploaded. But by maybe kind of tomorrow sometimes, you will then have the timestamps. You can go back through and watch all of these tips if you want to. We've also had a mention from Peter saying about the visibility. They've replaced the toggle with a camera contribution slider in details. Cool. So that's useful. I'll definitely check that out. Like I said, I'm actually not on the most current version. It came out yesterday, and I make it a habit not to necessarily update before a live stream just in case. But I will be downloading it today or tomorrow, and so I will check that out. But good to know we do have an option in there. This is a great question. Is it possible to create or control dust, dirt on surfaces or other materials with Maxon noise? Yes, absolutely. So we just looked at how to create that displacement. You could do it that way. Or another way that we can do it is, if I just bring that back and let's just get rid of these. I'm just going to do this on this like really simple cube. Just it makes my life a little bit easier. What we can do is we have something called the matrix scatter. And what you'll see here is it's like a matrix scatter object with a Redshift object tag on. What we can do is if I wanted to add like little dust particles or little kind of like elements to the surface of an object, we can change this mode to object. And then it's asking us, what object do you want me to clone my matrices on? So that would be our cube. And now hopefully you can see we have these tiny little spheres on here. And that is due to the Redshift object tag and the particles option. We have optimized spheres and we can add more of them. So we could do like 2,000 of these and we have more and more and more. And what's great about this is it's not actually geometry in my render view. So I can go quite high with this number inside of here. So let me actually switch this off now just so you can see everything. So we have the count value and we have these in here. We have our little optimized spheres. We can create points. We can create custom objects. So what we can do is we can go custom objects and then we could do like the little guy here. And then we can drag and drop a custom object in here. And then we've got a little guy. And we can even reduce the scale. So we've got little versions of this dude kind of going over here. So this is a cool way of adding like dust pieces to an object. Or yes, you could do it with displacement is probably the better option, but it would displace the mesh itself. So if you want it to look like additional pieces on top, then this could be the method for you. This could be a little bit easier. Okay, let me flick through. So Nazar was wondering, how can we reference bump, setup, or a set of nodes? So yes, in the same way that we set this up, you could set up your whole material and your node tree, and then you can just have that all in your material, and then you just reference that material just like we did. So you can reference loads of things. So I'm actually referencing this material here, which I've chosen just to have color. But if it has everything else in it, if it has bump, displacement, whatever, we can do that in there. So you now was wondering, is the reference node a new addition or was it since a previous version? No, it's been there for a while. It is not a new version. Let me just flick through. So there's a couple more things that I want to talk about. And that is a little bit on kind of optimization. So I don't want to go too long. I did promise you kind of like a 30, 40-minute stream and I've lied to you. Sorry. But hey, we've got a couple more things to show and then I'll do a couple more questions. But yeah, I'm glad it's useful though to everyone. So I want to talk a little bit about optimization. It's something I talk about all the time. And no, I'm not going to be going through the whole optimization setup, but I do want to talk a little bit about some of the things that are important. So I recently did like a workshop on this. So here we go. This is one of the scenes I want to talk about. So a few things can impact not only your Cinema 4D performance or your sort of like performance in 3D in general. I imagine it's kind of general rules across all DCCs, but also that can impact your render times and things like that, and your render view as well. So here's a few little things that could be important. Feel free, to screenshot or anything like that. So if you work with simulations and dynamics, cache those or bake those down. And what I mean by that is, right click, bake as Alembic, or inside the simulation tag itself, you can actually cache this. And this is handy for a few different reasons. So the first reason that it's handy for is because then when you then are working in Cinema 4D, it's not trying to also calculate your simulation. It's not trying to calculate that per frame. It's actually already cached and baked. It's also important, any of you that use render servers, any of you that use different laptops, different machines, you might find with simulations that aren't cached, you will get a different result dependent on the hardware or the machine that you're using. I wish I could tell you why this is. I don't know why, it's just the case. So if you're using a render server and you are looking to render your machine out across 2 or 3 or 4 different machines, make sure it's cached, or you will find that in some instances, the result that you're getting per frame is different. So bear that in mind. Things like high subdivisions, so high polygon counts. Again, we can slow things down. If you can, use Redshift tessellation when possible. And what I mean by that is, if we have an object, so maybe we have a sphere. So we have our sphere here, and we can get rid of these, get rid of that. And if I make it 16 segments, so low resolution, what we can do is, we can up-res this to make it nice and smooth, but that can reduce performance. Obviously not in this case because it's just a sphere, but if we're talking about general concepts of these tips, and what we can do, we can go to our Redshift object tag under geometry. If we override geometry, we can actually enable tessellation, which is subdivisions. And so now what you can see is we have a low res object, but we have it high resolution in my render view. And so again, this is scene dependent and it depends what you are doing, but if you can, use Redshift tessellation. Another little tip for you is to avoid high object counts. And when I say high object counts, I don't necessarily mean the objects in your scene. I do mean the objects in your objects manager, but everything adds up. So your tags, your selections, your keyframes, your objects, your materials, they can all have an impact on your performance of your software. And for example, I worked on sort of like optimizing a scene for a studio, and they had a particular asset that had, about 100 material tags on, and opening the scene took 6 minutes. We optimized the asset, deleted all the tags, optimized it, had 4 tags to 4 materials, and then we reopened it and it opened like that. So bear that in mind when you're then building your scenes, and as much as possible, if you can reduce things down, try and do that. High resolution textures, use procedural noises if you can, and then remove any unused objects and materials. And at the bottom, I just did the little things that are expensive. So unfortunately, displacement, motion blur, depth of field, caustics, refractions, if you have them all in the scene, they are going to impact your render times, unfortunately, and that is just the way it is. There are some things that we can do. And that is optimization. And so I actually did a stream on this a number of months ago, which shows how to get faster renders inside of Redshift. And I kind of like plug this all the time because it's still valid. As Dean said, caustics are the worst offender. Agreed. Yeah, so this basically is an hour-long stream, but feel free to play it on 2x speed because I talk a lot. And it goes through this optimization workflow here, which looks at unified sampling, local sampling, GI, and trace steps. And if there's ever a reason for you to do this, these are some of the tests that I did. This presentation was for a workshop that I did last week. And so these are some of the times that I could achieve. And the important thing here is the quality is the same. So it's all well and good getting faster render times, but if the quality is reduced, it's not necessarily beneficial. And so here are some of the others. Again, taking it from 7 minutes 40 to 1 minute 13, and then again, just sort of like 8 minutes to just under 4 minutes. So these things can make a big difference, as can things like hardware. But obviously we can't necessarily impact hardware, but we can impact our render times by looking at how we optimize our render settings and also how we optimize our scene itself by doing things like instancing. So, quick question from Tiagi regarding high object count. Any tips when using rigging character objects that makes a ton of stuff in the objects manager? So I'm going to be completely kind of straight here. I'm not very familiar when it comes to character rigging. But I don't know if anyone in the chat has any tips for this. If you're not experiencing underperformance, then this stuff's absolutely fine. It's mostly if you are coming across kind of issues and lag and stuff like that, then you might want to look at ways to optimize your scenes. And those are just a bunch of different tips that you can do. But yeah, if anyone has any tips on this, if not, feel free to drop us an email, training@maxon.net, and I can send it to some of the smart people in the team. Cool. So if we have no other questions, so I think we have one quick final one from Faded. When using surface distribution, sometimes a value doesn't represent actual object counts on the surface. Why is that a low poly mesh? Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, it should represent. It could be something to do with a low poly mesh. Yeah, normally it should actually represent the object count on there, but no, it could actually be to low poly mesh. Maybe try one of the different modes or one of the different methods and see if you're able to actually get a better kind of distribution of that. Okay, so a little question here from Lisa. What are the best times to stop by your studio with a laptop for help? You can always ask me questions. Unfortunately, I don't have a studio. I'm in my house, actually. I'm at home in the UK, but I say this, like, my emails and my DMs are always open. Feel free. I'm sort of like going to do a little like plug here. Feel free if you do want to get in touch with me and ask me any questions, anything on Redshift, C4D, any of this stuff. I post a lot on my Instagram. DMs are definitely always open, so feel free to contact me through there, or just the training@maxon.net will actually get through to a bunch of the team as well. And before we kind of like wrap this up, if there are no other questions, what I do want to show is, I've already kind of talked about the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel. There is so much content on here. The team does an amazing job. We're currently doing Chad's doing a really great, look at this, I love him. He's doing a really great Falling in Love with Red Giant. And so those of you that are into sort of video editing, post-production, all that kind of stuff, we're doing a Creative Max on there. We have so many different playlists and training sessions that you can just dive into on there. So I can't kind of shout out the team enough. They're amazing. It's all free and timestamped, thanks to Dr. Sassy. And if you ever want to find out kind of the other stuff we have going on, we have an events page on the website. And so on here is all of our live streams. So every single live stream that we do, you can dive into here and you can see that. But we also have a bunch of in-person events coming up. So all of the in-person events that we do, you could also find on here. So come to an event, come see us, come like hang out and say hi. Like we'd love to answer your questions in person and to meet you all in person. And as always, you know, thank you so much. Like I feel like I lied when I said this is going to be a 40-minute stream. I also lied when I said it was going to be 10 tips because I lost count. I don't think there were 10. I think there were way more than 10. But hey, I hope you all enjoyed it. Yeah, I'll be streaming again at the end of this month. But yeah, don't forget there's loads of other great streams going on. And thank you everyone for taking part in this session. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to, you know, comment and add your own tips and tricks. Like I love learning this stuff as much as you do. And yeah, all the best everyone. Happy almost Valentine's Day for tomorrow. And I'll catch you on a stream soon. Bye everyone.
Mm-hmm.